I'm Catholic. I think you should consider becoming Catholic. And a priest friend and I recently had a chat about some reasons that we think that is. Check it out. Hey everybody, it's Mike from The Gracious Guest Show here. TheGraciousGuest.org is the website. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel or liked this video, please go ahead and do that real quick. It really helps boost the channel, helps get the word out about this ministry I'm doing here, and shares that content a little more broadly across YouTube. That would really be appreciated. So thank you so much for tuning in today. As I said at the outset, it's Lent right now at the time of this recording, but whenever you're watching this, there's people of all kinds of different traditions, right? All over the world, different religions, different worldviews. And, if you're intellectually honest, I think, you have to admit that we don't really all just believe the same thing deep down, right? There are very real differences between these different systems, these different understandings of the divine, the meaning of life, what happens after we die, is there any meaning for life, to life, what is a human being? All of these things are the most important questions. And I am not just Catholic because I was raised that way. That's probably why I was Catholic for a long time. But at some point, I, as a friend of mine put it years ago, had to really think seriously about whether I would continue to rent my parents' faith or, in a sense, kind of purchase my own. What do I really believe? And so the reasons I'm Catholic today are far different and deeper and more personal than the reasons I was perhaps raised in the Catholic faith. And I wanted to talk a little bit with the chaplain at our high school where I teach, at Trinity High School in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, Father Matt Cannon. Father Matt is the parochial vicar at St. Teresa of the Child Jesus Parish in New Cumberland, PA. And he is one of our two chaplains at our Catholic high school. And I really love Father Matt. He's just a great person to talk to. And I thought, we have a beautiful chapel at school. Maybe we can just sit down together for an actual in-person discussion and just a little consideration, a relatively short episode here compared to some other interviews. And I just thought we'd have a nice little mini compact conversation about why be Catholic, right? Why should you consider it? So thank you so much for tuning in. Let's go ahead and check this out. Okay, we good. All right. We don't always have to look back and forth. We just kind of have the chat, but it'll be fun. So, Father Matt, thank you so much for coming on the Gracious Guest Show. It's been a long time coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and here we're in the chapel here at Trinity, which is nice. Very well may get announcements as this is going on. We can always edit those out, and then you won't know if I've edited them out. But anyway, so I just sent you, these questions kind of ahead of time as far as, as we're approaching Easter here. I've been thinking about this, people's journey from maybe how they were raised, sort of inherit a faith, so to speak, or you're kind of raised in that. And I think a lot of times people I've spoken to, that's as far as they sort of think that goes. It's like, well, you're Catholic because you were raised that way, and I'm Jewish because I was raised that way. And I think there's something to that, but I just want to get your take on this as far as, why are you Catholic, specifically, and how that journey kind of went.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, I was raised in a Catholic family, went to Mass, not every Sunday, but we went to Mass. Mm-hmm. And faith was always welcome in our home. We always prayed before meals. It was never a fact that we all knew we were Catholic and we identified as Catholic. And I went to Catholic school growing up. So did my two younger brothers. Both my parents went to Catholic school.
Where'd you go again?
St. Leo the Great in Lancaster, okay. And then Lancaster Catholic.
Gotcha, yeah.
So I grew up in a family where all of us went to Catholic school at one point of our lives. And so that was a blessing, being able to grow up knowing that the church was real, knowing that God was real, knowing that just going to Mass was not just something that we did, it was something that we did look forward to. Mm-hmm. And I think that when I was younger, I think a lot of kids, I didn't really understand what the Mass was all about. Like I knew my pastor, Father Sullivan, I would see him coming down in those big colorful vestments and he would, give his homily and he would do his thing on the altar. But for me, it was always I was fascinated by what Father Sullivan growing up did. Like even, just him being on the altar, and remember him coming over to the school, and we would have younger priests as assistants coming over, Father Charles, Father Walter Guzman, some ones I had growing up. And I think that they were really the really first witnesses for me, especially Father Sullivan,
sure,
to the joy that comes from being Catholic. And I think I first saw that in the priesthood, because I think priests are to be those witnesses
Yeah.
to the joy of the Catholic faith. Like when we think of priests, we think they're called to be other Jesuses. Like they're called to be an imitation of Jesus in a way, in a completely different way that, say, a layperson is. Not saying that a layperson is not called to imitate Christ.
Sure.
We're all called to imitate Christ. But the difference is the vocation of the priesthood is calling them to a particular state or way of life
Sure.
that directly reflects Jesus' first call to the apostles. When he tells the apostles, go and want you to go out and build my church, that call has been passed down to the priests for the 2,000-year history of the church. And I think for me, seeing that joy that came from Father Sullivan, seeing how happy he was, seeing the other assistants that he had that when I was growing up, I think that's where the first joy for me to understanding what it was to be Catholic, what it really meant to be Catholic, and how happy they were. And now, as a priest myself, as a Catholic for 33 years, this is my Jesus year.
Oh, okay.
33 years, right? And so I think in that way, like being able to perform the sacraments is the greatest joy that I have as a priest.
Yeah.
Because, I see people approaching the sacraments, whether it be parents bringing their babies to be baptized, whether that's someone going to confession, whether that's someone receiving the Eucharist, confirmation. I see the joy that comes from that. And that's
would you say it's a fair characterization of like what you said earlier about another alter Christus, right? Being another Christ, which I think some people then hear that they mistakenly might think that you're saying like an alternative Jesus, right? When it's obviously not that, but this as we are his body, that you in this special way are at, called into this particular kind of way that he makes himself present. Would you say that that's a fair characterization as far as how you might then be able to see certain things in the Christian life almost through his eyes or something like that, or
yeah, I would say that would
feel something like, I don't know. Yeah.
No, I mean, I would say that would be accurate. I think for me, it's knowing that when people see me, whether it be in or out of church, they see the black shirt, they see the white collar, the black pants, the black shoes. It's like they know you're a priest.
Right.
I've had people come up to me in the food store. People I've maybe have belonged to my parishes. I would hope I remember them in the moment. Say, "Hi, Father. How you doing, Father?" But I think the way that we not only dress our identity, but the way that we carry ourselves can be a lasting witness to the world, and that is very humbling. And it should be embraced with service and love. So knowing that when people see you, they want to see Jesus within you, but they also want to see you as a human being. They want to know you have emotions. They want to know you have interests, hobbies, that you like to have fun. Right. I just some of the funniest parts for me is like going into my school, both at St. Teresa's and here at Trinity, and like I'm telling people like, I like to go hiking and I like to play sports and watch sports. I'm like, you're allowed to do that?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's still to this day, I still get that shock value. And I think the more and more people like, it's shocked in a good way, but I think more and more when people realize that we are human beings and that they can get to know us in a similar way that we can get to know them, I think that is something that will really help my generation of priests, especially the guys I've been ordained for about 5 years, really help us and the people of God as a whole to see one another and have that mutual respect for one another.
Sure. So obviously in your case, as you said, it really sounds like your deeper connection to the faith itself really kind of came through in God's will and His providence through that preliminary kind of interest specifically in the vocation of the priesthood. Now, of course, most people watching this aren't, or listening to this on the audio podcast, are not priests. They may or may not be called to the priesthood. But how do you see in terms of Catholicism in general compared to, let's say, different religious systems or different worldviews? What kinds of things about our faith in particular do you find, I would say maybe especially poignant or good connection points with people, just lay people even, if you're trying to make the case to someone who's on the fence, about the Catholic faith? I know we have some students here, who are just just came into the church recently,
right?
So you've had some of those conversations with young people too, perhaps coming to you already inquiring, or maybe it's some that you get to talk to in ministry. Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm asking. What are some of the things you see as far as people's interest, in Catholicism distinct from other religious systems or views?
Right. Now, C.S. Lewis said once, famous Christian author, he said, when Protestants look at Catholics, it's almost like a jungle. Like, why is there so much here? And then when Catholics look at Protestants, it's like a barren wasteland. Why is there not anything
Right.
here? Right.
Where's all this stuff? Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think in that way, when someone is looking to join the church and someone is going through the RCIA process, and they do it for different reasons. Sometimes they do it because their family is Catholic, or like maybe they married a Catholic and their kids are in Catholic school, or maybe they were asked to be a godparent or a sponsor,
Right.
and or just because they maybe were in a church that didn't really align with their family and personal values anymore, and so they started looking at the Catholic Church, and they started thinking, oh, this makes sense, or this makes sense to me, so maybe I should look more into the Catholic Church. And I think in that way we see that the Catholic Church is the one and only church that can absolutely say that we were founded by Jesus Christ himself. Because you look at any other mainstream Christian church, not a single one identifies Jesus Christ himself as their founder. They'll say like the person who founded us was inspired by Jesus, or that person knew someone who was inspired by Jesus.
Is it distinct from like the historic claim that this institution, for lack of a better term, actually literally goes back to Jesus, the person 2,000 years ago? Right?
So for me, that's all the proof that I need to know that. I mean, everything else, from the sacraments, from prayer to that personal relationship with Jesus, we have that within the church. But if you know nothing else about the church, that's all you need to look at to say, like, that is how we know the church is the one true church. The Catholic Church is.
Sure. And I, sometimes find, like, we were just talking in my class recently about some like legitimate cases of the church's ministry with exorcism, and certain cases of in that kind of setting, the legitimacy of certain relics, for example, being manifest, or certain demonic entities responding in a very obvious way to an exorcism performed under that apostolic sort of blessing, versus someone just trying to do it themselves, and all the danger that can lead to. So those kinds of things I found interesting with some students as well. The idea of, I hesitate to use the word proof, but like these lines of evidence, that there seems to be something about this church that's got
no one bothered. No, like the joke I heard once is like, no one bothers with the church until their house starts getting possessed. They start hearing noises like, quick, there's a demon, somebody call a non-denominational worship leader. Like, where's the
director, like,
where's the nearest Catholic church, where are the priests?
Well, and I've even heard cases, several now, of with all due respect, of course, to our separated brethren, but like, a Methodist pastor who's trying to help someone with deliverance prayer, and it's clear that there's something much deeper going on, and he phones his priest friend across the street.
Exactly right, for advice.
You need to go see Father so and so. Yeah, so there's something to that. Are there other, as far as like, say, the sacramental life or the life of prayer? Obviously your experience of it's going to be, one particular. Well, a range, but like a range, within the priesthood specifically, as opposed to maybe a layperson's experience of it. But that being said, are there particular aspects of the sacramental life of the church, or the history of saints, intercession of saints, that kind of thing, and anything that for you is maybe like the top 2 or 3 characteristics of our faith that you particularly treasure, or that you think are extra wonderful?
Extra wonderful.
Like yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the saints. I mean, I like to say, when people never said this, but I like, when we priests say, like, you're all called to be saints, that's not just like something on the top 10 list that the bishop sends us every year that we have to include in our couple homilies.
Don't forget, guys.
Right. Don't forget, you got to include this in like maybe 3 or 4 homilies. Right.
Yeah.
But I think the thing about that is that you read the lives of the saints. You want to know who never thought they'd be a saint? The saints.
Right. Yeah.
Because like, if you read some of the stories, some of them were pretty annoying to get along with. Some of them were not very people. We're not very people person. We're not very good with like even interacting with people.
Right.
Some of them were much more like academics, and much more like just found solace in their faith in God in books, as opposed to interactions and conversations with people.
Yeah.
And I think in that way too, the saints are there for everyone. And God knew exactly when he was calling each particular saint. He called them at the exact time and the exact moment and the exact culture and society that he needed to call them, because he knew exactly what that particular culture and society and time was dealing with, and he knew he needed to call particular saints to push back on that culture and society and bring forth the church.
Right.
And so in that way, this generation is no different. You know, we're going to have, years from now, we're going to hear about saints that we've never heard of right now. We're going to hear their stories, and we're going to hear about that young man, that young lady, this guy, this girl, you know, like, and all of a sudden we're going to be like, oh my gosh, like this is someone that like passed away like 30, 40 years ago. Like when I was still young, like this is not someone who lived 100, 200, 300 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. One I usually bring up recently for kids this age is Blessed Carlo Acutis, who lived in Italy. You know, here's a 15, 16-year-old kid who tragically passed away from leukemia. But, you know, you see pictures of him, you would think that he was just an ordinary Italian kid.
Yeah.
Here's a kid who had a website, had a blog in which he wrote about the Eucharist.
Even the clothes aren't so different yet that it's like, oh, that's old fashioned. I mean, it looks like it was a photo taken just 4 or 5 years ago. It's a little more, but not much. Yeah.
So I mean, like when he becomes Saint Carlo Acutis, God willing, he's going to be a saint for this generation.
Yeah.
He's going to be a saint that a lot of young people look to as as a witness and an inspiration. And I think God especially knew, you know, let's canonize someone who had a PlayStation. Right, who had the original PlayStation. Why? Because he knew exactly what this generation is going to need.
Yeah, and a good, example of all the virtues, of course, we talk about, and then the importance of moderation. Because what does moderation look like? In a monastery, that's maybe not what moderation is going to look like in my life. As a moderation in Carlo Acutis' life is not being on the PlayStation too much.
Yeah, exactly.
It's maybe not like no place. So I think that's important, for us to recognize too. Like the word diversity gets thrown around sometimes, of course, and people have a lot of different understandings sometimes of what they mean by that. But I always love, and I've heard it so many times in homilies and stuff, or like different spiritual readings, but I think it's so beautiful, that image of the stained glass window. We have some in here, of course, but that idea that you have these different colored panes, the different texture, the different kind of characteristics, that range, that diversity, but that one light that shines through all of us, through all of them together.
Yeah.
Opposed to all of the materialist, secularist, sort of ultimately even demonic kind of influences in the world that are it's always the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's always just dress it up in a different uniform. But at the end of the day, it's the same. It's like the one trick pony, right? The demons are at the end of the day. So. So I throw that out there too. I think a lot of the misunderstandings people have, it seems, right, about the faith, being about control and this monolithic experience. But there is a lot of diversity, obviously, there within God's plan. So with this in mind, I mean, so how do you, as you are, so those kids I mentioned, the students we had here that were thinking of joining the church and did, others who were thinking of it, I've had a few this year, come up to me after class and say, hey, how do I learn more? What kinds of things do you, in a moment like that, or with someone who may not be so actively seeking, but you get the impression that they're on the fence, or it's a family member, right? That can be tricky sometimes. What kinds of things, and maybe in what way, because there's some tact, right, to be had, would you potentially, go about, or do you go about proposing the faith? Was it John Paul who said, we propose but don't impose?
Right.
I like that distinction. So,
right.
So how would you? Maybe that's a good way to ask. Like, how would you propose this invitation to the church? Especially to someone who might say, for example, like, what's the big deal? What I am if I'm just a good person? We hear that a lot.
First thing is you can't spell good without God.
I like that.
You literally can't.
Yeah,
so it's like you can be good in life. I mean, a good person, someone can live a good life without believing in God. Doesn't mean necessarily on the practical level, if you don't believe in God, you're automatically a bad person.
Right.
But I think that you'll never understand or realize the full goodness that you have within you until you know God. Until God is an ever-present part in your life, or not even a part, but just an ever-present, just he he's there,
right?
And you know that he loves you. and then you do
almost
everything.
Like an easier context,
Correct.
something
Right.
like that, right? Yeah. Okay.
Right. So then, in turn, you do everything that you can to make yourself present in His plan.
Right. Yeah.
Praying, being able to discern properly, being able to figure out who God is calling me to be. And sometimes that happens earlier in life, sometimes it happens later in life.
Right.
And I think in that way, the best advice that I can give someone who maybe is exploring the Catholic faith is really look at yourself and say to yourself, what is first attracting me to the church? Because there's usually something that's attracting someone to the church that they haven't found, and either they're in a church currently or not. Something that they heard, something that they read, something that they maybe just heard in passing. Someone in their family or friends said something to them. And so then I would say pray about that, look into that, and then the doors to the church, the door of faith will open to you.
Yeah.
And then you will be able then to look at from the sacraments to prayer to the Bible to tradition, apostolic tradition. You'll be able to realize like the church is the only church that has all the answers to your questions.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost like remember those old Magic 3D books that would like you'd like stare at it cross-eyed forever, and then until like the image would pop out of it. I sometimes feel like it's almost something like that, where it's like this. I may not have all of my questions answered in a moment. I mean, it's a whole lifetime of asking those questions, but that to reach that point of faith that this is my home where I'm in right relationship with the one who is the ultimate answer.
Right.
And then I'm with him. I'm on his team. Well, that's great. I'm gonna have to get going here. The bell just rang. This is like that Trinity.
Middle school day.
I love it. Yeah. But no, Father, just last question for you. Anything? I didn't tell you this ahead of time. I'm starting to do this more. Anything in particular you want any of the viewers to keep in prayer, or just take to our own prayers, in terms of your ministry, or just anything that the church you think needs right now? Or
Sure. I ask that you please pray for an increase in vocations, not only to the priesthood and religious life, but also for marriage, for faithful, loving marriages. Pray for our diocese, the Diocese of Harrisburg, that for our Bishop Senior, all the priests and everyone in the diocese, all the faithful, and may our diocese continue to be a witness to the churches and to the churches within our diocese and the people that are within them.
Amen. Well, thanks so much, Father. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I really enjoyed that conversation with Father Matt, and it really, again, is not at all meant to be some sort of exhaustive, pitch for Catholicism and every little detail filled in. Far from it. It's just sort of a something to whet your appetite a little bit, a little appetizer, and it gives you a little window into some of the things that I like to do here on this channel, some of the issues we like to get into, and some of the questions we like to raise, and many, many more. So, again, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do that, like this video, share it far and wide. Thank you for stopping by the Gracious Guest Show today, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Till then, don't forget to wonder. God bless you.